I had a row of pepper plants 3 summers ago that were as good as dead, yellow, wilted, leaves curling up like paper. I'd already written them off. Then Daniel's wife Ruth handed me a bucket of what she calls her liquid gold, told me to pour it around the roots and walked back to her kitchen. 4 days later, those same plants were standing up green. You won't find this in any fertilizer aisle, and there's a reason. When the synthetic fertilizer companies took over American gardening after the war, this old recipe got buried because nobody can bag it and sell it to you. Stick with me to the end, because there's one cheap kitchen ingredient Ruth stirs in that makes the whole thing work. Let me tell you who buried this, because it wasn't an accident. After the war ended in 1945, this country had a whole lot of factories sitting there that had been built to make one thing, ammonium nitrate. That's the stuff they packed into munitions and explosives. When the shooting stopped, the demand for explosives dried up overnight, but the factories were still standing, so they got converted. Same chemical, ammonium nitrate, but now they pointed it at the garden instead of the battlefield. It turns out the same nitrogen that blows things up also makes a tomato plant shoot up fast and green. And by the late 1940s and into the 1950s, cheap bagged fertilizer, your 10-10-10, was flooding every feed store and hardware store in America. My own father was right there for it. He had a backyard garden in Lebanon County, straight rows, and somewhere in there he traded whatever he used to do for a bag of 10-10-10 and a can of 7 Dust under the sink. That's what he taught me. That's what I carried on to my own land for years. Buy the bag, feed the plant, fight the bug, buy another bag next spring. Here's what nobody mentioned. The minute fertility became something you buy in a bag, the old way of making it for free had to go. And it did. It dropped right out of the magazines and the advice columns. Not because it stopped working. It works as well today as it did 200 years ago. It got dropped because there's no money in it. You can't patent a bucket of compost. You can't put a barcode on rainwater. The soil quietly got poorer every year. The plants got weaker and needier. And the answer was always the same. Go buy another bag. That's the war you've been losing, and most folks don't even know they're in it. So let me show you what got buried. What Ruth hands me in that bucket, what she calls her liquid gold, is a fermented tea, not the kind you drink. It's compost and aged manure steeped in water until the whole thing comes alive. And the recipe is so simple, it's almost insulting. You take a 5-gallon bucket and you fill it about halfway with finished compost and dark, crumbly, the good stuff out of the bottom of the pile. Then you add a handful of aged manure, aged, not fresh. Daniel's been composting his horse manure for years. Ruth grabs a couple of fistfuls of that. Then you top the bucket off with water. Now stop right there, because the water matters more than you'd think, and I'll come back to that. You let it steep 4 or 5 days, and once a day you give it a good stir with a stick. That stir isn't optional. You stir it to keep air moving through, because if it sits dead still, it goes sour and anaerobic and starts to stink in a bad way. A stirred brew smells earthy, like a forest floor. When it's ready, it'll be dark, too dark to pour straight on a plant. So you dilute it, roughly 1 part tea to 4 parts water, until it's the color of weak tea. That's it. That's the whole forbidden recipe. A bucket, a pile, and rainwater. You will never see that on a shelf, because there's no shelf it can sit on. Now here's where it gets interesting, and here's the part that explains why my dead-looking peppers came back. Because if you've been gardening the bagged way, you'd assume those peppers were starving for nitrogen. They weren't. I had plenty of nitrogen in that bed. What had collapsed underneath them was the biology. The living part of the soil had crashed. That liquid gold isn't fertilizer the way you think of fertilizer. It's alive. When you steep compost in water for a few days and keep it aired up, you're brewing billions of living things, bacteria, fungi, little protozoa that eat the bacteria. When you pour that around the roots, you're not feeding the plant directly. You're inoculating the soil. You're putting back the living workforce that pulls the nutrients already sitting in your dirt and hands them up into the root. There's iron in your soil. There's phosphorus, potassium, trace minerals. They're already there. The plant can't reach most of it on its own. It needs the microbes to unlock it and deliver it to the root surface. A bag of synthetic salt bypasses all of that. It force feeds the plant a quick hit of nitrogen and starves the very biology that's supposed to do the feeding. So the soil goes lazy, then dead, and you're back at the store. I asked Daniel about this one morning standing at his fence. He just shrugged and said, "I don't feed my plants, Bill. I feed what feeds my plants." 50 years of gardening in one sentence, and that's exactly why you can't buy this in a jug. The active ingredient is alive, and living things die on a shelf. You can't bottle it and ship it. That's the whole reason it disappeared. Now let me give you the numbers, because this is where folks stop believing me until they try it. Those pepper plants 3 summers back were yellow, curled, written off. Ruth had me pour her liquid gold, about 1.25 quarts right at the base of each one, soaking the root zone, not the leaves. 4 days. 4 days later, those same plants were standing up green and firm like nothing had happened. I almost didn't believe my own eyes. That's not me feeding them nitrogen and watching them perk up over 3 weeks. That's the soil rebooting. The microbes recolonize those roots and turn the food back on. For a healthy plant, the dose is about 1 to 2 quarts poured around the base of each one, right over the root zone. I do it once a week through the growing season on the plants that need a push. And what you get from weekly applications isn't a sudden jolting. It's plants that are visibly darker, leaves thicker, stems sturdier, the kind of green that doesn't wilt by 2 in the afternoon. That's not a fertilizer response. That's a soil that's finally awake. And no, you're not going to find a bag that does that, because a bag can't carry anything that's alive. Now, here's the part that took me a couple of ruined batches to learn, and it's the part most people get wrong even when they hear about compost tea. The water. I told you to come back to it. You cannot use straight tap water out of the spigot. Most municipal water is chlorinated, and chlorine does exactly what it's designed to do. It kills microbes. That's its whole job in the pipe. So if you brew your liquid gold in chlorinated tap water, you've sterilized the very thing that makes it work. You've made dirty water. Daniel uses rainwater always. That's part of why I put in my 50-gallon rain barrel under the downspout years ago. Rain off the roof has no chlorine in it. If all you've got is town water, fill your bucket and let it sit out uncovered for 24 hours before you start. The chlorine will gas off on its own and you're back in business. But never skip that step. And one more thing on the same line, never, ever pour it on full strength. I told you to dilute it down to weak tea color, and I meant it. A strong, concentrated brew will burn the roots, especially on a young or already stressed plant. When you're trying to rescue these things, not finish them off. Weak tea, soak the root zone. That's the rhythm. Too strong, and you've done the plant's enemy's work for them. That right there is the whole living system, and it's exactly the kind of thing that never made it into the standard advice, because the standard advice came from people selling bags. But there's one more piece. Ruth does one small thing to that bucket. One cheap thing out of her own kitchen that takes it from working slow to working like you saw with those peppers. I'm going to give you that at the very end, so stick with me, because without it, the tea still works. It just works at half speed. Now, if what I'm walking you through here is making sense, and you're starting to see how the Amish do this differently than the way most of us were taught, then I want to point you somewhere. Everything I just explained about why that liquid feeds the soil instead of the plant, or the whole living system underneath your beds. I laid it all out in my book, The 30-Day Amish Pest-Proof Garden Protocol. Chapter 4 is called Building Pest-Proof Soil, and it walks through the soil food web in plain language, plus Daniel's compost pile that never stops. The very pile this tea gets brewed from. It's $17 at backyardbillbooks.com. If you're tired of the chemical treadmill and you want the whole system instead of one tip, that's where it lives. If you're watching on your TV, grab your phone and point it at the QR code on screen. Take your time finding it. I'll be right here. So let me come back to the part the fertilizer aisle would rather you skipped. Here's the math, plain as I can make it. Ruth's liquid gold is free. You brew it from a compost pile you already have and a barrel of rainwater that fell out of the sky. There's nothing to sell. And a thing nobody can sell is a thing nobody has any reason to teach you. The synthetic fertilizer industry had every reason to replace it, because every spring you walk into the store and hand over money for another bag. A free liquid generates 0 sales. A bag of 10-10-10 generates a sale every single year for the rest of your gardening life. Now, here's the deeper reason it disappeared from the advice columns. Living compost tea can't be standardized. It can't be patented. It can't be bottled and put on a shelf with a barcode, because the active ingredient is alive and living microbes die in a sealed bag. There's no product to scan at a register. So it got quietly dropped and the bag took its place. I'll be fair with you, because I was on the other side of this for years. Synthetic fertilizer is convenient. It's consistent. You measure it, you spread it, and it does grow big plants fast. I'm not going to pretend it doesn't, but here's the hidden cost. It feeds the plant directly and bypasses the soil entirely. The biology that's supposed to be doing that work goes quiet, then it goes hungry, then it dies off. So next year the soil does even less, and you need a little more out of the bag, and a little more the year after that. That's not fertility, that's dependence, and that cost was yours. Every season you fought weak, yellowing plants and reached for another bag, and that was the price of nobody ever teaching you the recipe. My father paid it for 40 years. I paid it for 15. The whole time the answer was a bucket and a compost pile. All right? Stick with me to the end time, because I promised you the one thing Ruth stirs in that makes the whole thing work. It's molasses. Plain, cheap, unsulfured blackstrap molasses straight out of the kitchen cupboard. Ruth stirs in about 1 1 tablespoon per gallon of finished tea, and she does it 12 to 24 hours before she pours it. That's the timing that matters. Here's what's happening. Those simple sugars are food for the bacteria already in the brew. Feed them overnight, and the microbial population explodes, multiplies many times over while you sleep. By morning, you're not pouring steeped compost water around the roots. You're pouring a flood of living, active microbes. That's the difference between a tea that greens a plant up slow and the one that stood my peppers back up in 4 days. Now, 2 catches, because the details are the whole thing. It has to be unsulfured molasses, not white sugar, not sulfured molasses. White sugar and sulfured stuff feed the wrong organisms, and you can sour the whole bucket. And don't overdo it. More molasses isn't more better. Pile in too much sugar and the microbes burn through the oxygen. The brew goes anaerobic and it turns sour and slimy on you. 1 tablespoon a gallon, 12 hours ahead. That's it. And that right there is the kind of free trick that could never fit on a fertilizer label. Before I let you go, I want to come back to one thing. What you've got now is the recipe they stopped teaching, a fertility source nobody can charge you for. But the liquid gold is only one layer. In the book, I lay out the complete system in Chapter 2, the 5 defense layers, and this tea is layer 1, the healthy living soil that makes plants strong enough to shrug pests off in the first place. If you're done with one-off fixes and you want the whole architecture, the way Daniel runs his garden, it's all in there. $17 at backyardbillbooks.com. If you're on a phone or a laptop right now, the link's sitting in the description below. Go ahead and tap it whenever you're ready. No rush at all. I'll wait while you pull it up. So that's the forbidden fertilizer, a free living liquid you brew from a bucket of compost, a barrel of rainwater, and a spoonful of molasses, and it'll reboot the soil under a plant you'd already written off. Now you've got a fertility source no company can ever sell back to you. Daniel's been growing this way for 50 years, and on a few hundred Amish farms across this county, brewing that bucket is just what a Tuesday looks like. Next time I'll show you another method they buried, how Daniel pulls 100 pounds of potatoes out of a 4x4 patch without ever touching a rototiller. Try the liquid gold on one struggling bed this season. See what happens, then drop a note in the comments and let me know how it goes. I'll see you in the next one.